On October 2, 1552, the city of Kazan, the capital of the last remnants of the mighty Mongol Empire, was engulfed in flames above the Volga, crumbling under the assault. Beyond its walls, 10,000 Tatar horsemen fought valiantly until their last breath, while 150,000 Russian soldiers breached defenses shattered by unprecedented weaponry. Observing this spectacle was the 22-year-old Ivan IV, whom history would forever label the Terrible. Yet, this is more than just a battle narrative. It is the story of how a nascent state finally emerged from the shadow of the Mongol Empire after 3 centuries of subjugation, taking its initial steps toward becoming the largest nation on Earth. How did this young Tsar manage to overcome an empire that had dominated Rus for 3 centuries? And how did this singular decision reshape the course of history? Please share your thoughts in the comments and let us know your location and current time. Now, let's revisit 1552. To grasp the full significance of the Kazan engagement, we must look back to the 10th century. In 1237, the Mongol cavalry of Batu Khan swept through the steppes like a hurricane, not merely conquering Rus, but utterly crushing it. Russian principalities were razed to the ground. Kiev, the spiritual heart of Slavic civilization, lay in ruins, and for the following 240 years, Russian princes paid homage to the Khans of the Golden Horde. This was not merely a military occupation, but a complete dominance, economic, political, and psychological. Annually, Russian princes were compelled to deliver tribute to Sarai, the Golden Horde's capital. They also had to seek permission to govern their own territories. At the Khan's command, Mongol horsemen would appear to plunder, pillage, and enslave the populace. However, by the 15th century, the Golden Horde began to fracture. Internal strife and a decline in power led to the emergence of 3 new khanates from the empire's ruins: the Crimean, Astrakhan, and Kazan khanates. Among these 3, Kazan posed the most significant threat to Moscow. Why? Its strategic location. Kazan was situated directly on the Volga, a crucial trade and military artery. From its stronghold on a high hill, the people of Kazan controlled all movement between Moscow and the east. Moreover, Kazan meticulously preserved Mongol military traditions. Tatar cavalry remained the steppe's most formidable warriors. From its founding in 1438 until 1552, Russian forces attempted to conquer Kazan at least 10 times, and each time they failed. These assaults typically followed a predictable pattern. Russian troops arrived, besieged the city, bombarded it for several weeks, then retreated due to logistical challenges or attacks on their supply convoys by Tatar cavalry. Kazan appeared impregnable, but in 1547, a 17-year-old decided to alter this perception. His name was Ivan Vasilyevich, though history would remember him under a different moniker: Ivan the Terrible. Ivan IV was unlike other princes. He became Grand Prince at the age of 3 after his father's sudden demise. Subsequent events profoundly shaped the future Tsar's character. Rather than receiving care and education, young Ivan witnessed boyar families vying for power around the throne. They ignored him, even ridiculed him, while themselves living lavishly at the state's expense. Ivan grew up fearful and isolated, but also with an iron resolve. He vowed never again to allow such a situation for Russia. He would make Russia strong. He would end its dependence on anyone. And the greatest impediment to this ambition was Kazan. In 1547, at just 16 years old, Ivan undertook an unprecedented move. He proclaimed himself Tsar, from Caesar, Emperor of all Rus, not merely a grand prince. This was a bold assertion of absolute power. Immediately, Ivan turned his attention to Kazan. But Ivan recognized that old methods wouldn't work. Russian forces had suffered defeat 10 times. He needed a completely novel approach. Ivan's military campaigns in 1547 and 1549 to 1550 failed. Yet, unlike his predecessors, Ivan did not surrender. Instead, he learned. He understood that the issue wasn't his soldiers' bravery. The problem lay in logistics and technology. To conquer Kazan, Ivan required 3 elements: a forward base near the target, modern siege weaponry, and a professional army. And so, Ivan began preparing for a battle that would fundamentally alter history. In 1551, something extraordinary transpired on the Volga. From the town of Uglich, thousands of numbered logs floated downstream. These were no ordinary logs. They were components of a prefabricated fortress. Military engineer Ivan Vorotkov designed an entire wooden fortress, disassembled it, numbered each part, and transported it 900 kilometers downriver. Upon reaching its destination, merely 18 versts from Kazan, Russian forces erected it in a matter of weeks. They named it Svyazk. This was not merely an engineering feat, it was strategic genius. For the first time, Russia possessed a secure base near Kazan, a place to store provisions and weapons, serving as a launching pad for attacks. The concerns of lengthy supply lines were eliminated. But Ivan did not cease there. He understood that the conventional Russian forces, composed of feudal cavalry where each noble commanded his own men, were insufficient. They lacked discipline and coordinated training. Thus, Ivan established something entirely new, the Streltsy. This marked Russia's inaugural standing army of professional musketeers. These soldiers received pay, underwent professional training, and, critically, pledged allegiance to the Tsar rather than the nobility. They were armed with arquebuses, the most advanced firearms of that era, and of course there was the artillery. Ivan invited specialists from Europe, particularly from Italy and Germany, experts in contemporary siege warfare. He amassed 150 cannons, a formidable artillery power by the standards of the time. However, the pivotal weapon involved a man named Butler, ostensibly an English engineer whom the Russians called Rossmysl, meaning wise, a specialist in a novel technology, tunneling and using gunpowder to breach walls. By June 1552, preparations were complete. Ivan had learned from past failures. Now he possessed not merely a large army, but a more refined one, with superior technology and a more elaborate strategy. On June 16, 1552, the 22-year-old Ivan IV led 150,000 warriors toward Kazan. This marked the 11th attempt, but this time, things were destined to be different. On August 22, 1552, as Russian troops appeared before Kazan's walls, the Tatar defenders remained undaunted. They had repelled the Russians 10 times previously. Why should this instance be different? Kazan was situated on a high hill, encircled by thick wooden walls and a deep moat. Inside, there were several months' worth of provisions, a concealed underground water source, and 10,000 Tatar warriors, boasting the world's finest cavalry. Khan Yedigar Mohammed even sent Ivan a message: "Everything is prepared for you here. We invite you to a feast." But what transpired next astonished them. Instead of a direct assault, the Russian forces began digging trenches. They excavated zigzagging trenches, gradually approaching the city. This technique, known as saps, had been developed in Europe but had not yet been seen on the Russian steppes. Meanwhile, Ivan Vorotkov was constructing something unprecedented in Russia, a battery tower. This was no ordinary wooden siege tower, but a 12-meter, multi-tiered engineering marvel designed specifically to house artillery. Its uppermost platform could accommodate 10 heavy cannons. The lower levels held 50 lighter cannons. The concept was focused firepower, 60 cannons firing at the identical spot on the wall. This was the precursor to modern artillery fortifications and was revolutionary. Yet there was a hitch. Kazan also possessed cannons. If they obliterated the tower during its construction, all efforts would be in vain. Consequently, construction proceeded at night, hidden behind temporary walls. In the meantime, the Russian artillery had a singular mission: to silence Kazan's guns. On August 29th, after a week of bombardment, they succeeded. Kazan's heavy guns fell silent. The tower could now be moved into position. But just as everything seemed to be going well, nature intervened. Terrifying storms erupted. Torrential rain transformed the Russian camp into a muddy quagmire. Tents were torn away by the wind, and morale plummeted. Some Russian soldiers believed it was sorcery, that Tatar shamans were conjuring the bad weather. Even historical chronicles mentioned Kazan mages appearing on the walls each morning, performing strange rituals. In response, Ivan brought a crucifix believed to contain a fragment of the true cross from Jerusalem. Priests blessed the camp, and whether by coincidence or not, the weather cleared. Meanwhile, another struggle unfolded beneath the ground. Miners silently burrowed tunnels toward the walls. Their initial target was Kazan's subterranean water source. The city boasted a secret underground water system, enabling it to withstand prolonged sieges, but Rossmysl, the English engineer, discovered it. On August 30th, an explosion reverberated. The water supply was cut off. Every drop of water in Kazan now had to be rationed meticulously. The battery tower was advanced into position, and from its 12-meter height, 60 cannons began to relentlessly pound the same section of the wall. Inside the city, conditions grew desperate. No water, dwindling food supplies, and the walls crumbling with each passing day. Kazan still refused to surrender. When Ivan even sent Tatar captives back with peace proposals, the defenders on the walls shot their compatriots. They preferred them to die swiftly rather than endure slow torture. But Ivan had not yet deployed his decisive weapon. Underground, miners had dug intricate tunnels directly beneath the main walls. At crucial points, they created large chambers and filled them with gunpowder, tons of it. By September 30th, everything was prepared. A series of fuses were connected, creating an intricate network. The strategy was to trigger a series of successive detonations, which would undermine the structural integrity of the walls at several critical points. On the morning of October 2nd, 1552, the order was given. The initial blast resonated like thunder. An entire section of the wall near the Arsk Gate was obliterated. Another explosion followed near the Nogai Gate, and then a third. As the smoke cleared, 3 massive breaches yawned in Kazan's defenses, allowing the 50,000-strong Russian army to surge forward. What unfolded next was among the fiercest urban conflicts of the 15th century. Russian forces poured through the gaps like a raging torrent. However, Kazan's defenders refused to yield. They fiercely contested every street, every dwelling, every alleyway. This was a desperate, ultimate stand for a culture sensing its impending demise. The Tatar cavalry, formidable warriors of the open steppes, found themselves constricted within the narrow city streets. Unable to leverage their speed and agility, they nevertheless maintained their resistance. Civilians, men, women, and even children, seized whatever they could find and joined the fray. They hurled stones from rooftops, poured boiling oil from windows. They understood that the city's fall would signify the end of their known world, and their apprehension proved correct. Ivan Streltsy, his trained musketeers, advanced through each block with remarkable discipline. They picked off defenders from a distance, rendering the traditional close-quarters combat skills of the Tatars less effective. In Kazan's principal mosque, the religious leader Kol Sharif, alongside his students, made a final stand. They transformed the madrasa, an Islamic school, into a provisional stronghold and fought to the last. Kol Sharif perished defending his sacred library. By midday on October 2nd, Khan Yadigar Muhammad was captured. Shortly thereafter, the leading Nogai warlords also surrendered. Some survivors attempted to flee into the northern forests, but were hunted down and killed. Others retreated to the inner citadel, but hope was lost. By sunset, Kazan had fallen. What ensued was brutal. Even by 15th century standards, a mass slaughter occurred. Most Tatar structures were razed, and mosques were torched. Yet, there were also instances of compassion. Between 60,000 and 100,000 Russian captives and slaves, seized in raids over many years, were liberated. Many had endured decades of bondage. Some had even forgotten how to speak Russian. Ivan did not participate in the street fighting. According to historical records, he remained in his tent, praying throughout the battle. Some historians interpret this as strategic wisdom, suggesting a czar should not risk his life in chaotic combat. Others believe Ivan was simply frightened. However, what truly mattered was not Ivan's whereabouts, but his achievement. After a 42-day siege, after 114 years of existence, after centuries as the regional center of Mongol Tatar power on the Volga, Kazan had fallen. On October 4th, Ivan entered the subjugated city. He commanded the construction of an Orthodox church on the site of the main mosque and decreed a new symbol for Russian churches, a cross surmounting an Islamic crescent. The message was unmistakable. The last Mongol empire had been shattered. But history did not conclude there. In fact, it was just beginning. The fall of Kazan was more than merely a military triumph. It represented a watershed moment in global history. It was one of those junctures where one can truly say that the world was transformed from before to after the event. Allow me to elaborate. The victory at Kazan conclusively demonstrated a critical fact. European military technology, cannons, siege engineering, professional armies, outmatched traditional steppe warfare tactics. For centuries, the Mongol Tatar cavalry had dominated battlefields through speed, maneuverability, and equestrian archery. However, against reinforced walls, against cannons, against firearms, this advantage vanished. This is why other khanates quickly collapsed after Kazan. Astrakhan was conquered in 1556. Within a few decades, Siberia, the final khanate, also fell. The era of steppe empires ended. With Kazan, and subsequently Astrakhan, incorporated under Russian control, the entire Volga River, from its source to its mouth, became Russian territory. This was Eastern Europe's most vital trade route, now controlled by Moscow. This opened up trade with Persia via the Caspian Sea, pathways to Central Asia, and, most importantly, paved the way into Siberia. Just 3 decades after Kazan's fall, Russian fur hunters began crossing the Urals. By 1639, less than a century after Kazan, Russians had reached the Pacific Ocean. They had traversed the entire Eurasian continent in a time frame that other European nations required merely to explore a single coastline. This explains why Russia is currently the world's largest country by landmass. Everything began with the conquest of Kazan. Yet perhaps the most profound consequence was the shift in Russia's self-perception. For 300 years, Russia had endured under the dominance of Mongol Tatar Muslim rule. The Grand Princes of Moscow were compelled to bow before the Khan. They paid tribute. They sought permission. With the conquest of Kazan, this relationship underwent a complete reversal. For the first time, Moscow ceased to be subordinate. For the first time, Russians became conquerors. And for the first time, the Russian state emerged as a multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire. Kazan brought in dozens of peoples: Tatars, Chuvash, Mari, Udmurts, and Bashkirs. Some adhered to Islam, while others followed ancient ancestral beliefs. Now, all of them found themselves under Moscow's rule. This is why some scholars pinpoint October 2nd, 1552, as the foundational moment for the multicultural Russian Empire as we recognize it today. However, there was also a bleak aspect to this event. The Muslim inhabitants of Kazan were expelled from the city, mosques were demolished, and a campaign of forced conversion to Christianity began, though it didn't achieve complete success. For the Tatars, this was not a triumphant victory of civilization over barbarism. It signified the demise of their independent state, marking the beginning of centuries under foreign dominion. Even now, on October 15th, or October 2nd in the old calendar, some Tatars in Tatarstan observe a day of remembrance and sorrow, commemorating those who sacrificed their lives defending Kazan. Russian authorities prohibited public gatherings on this day in 2021, yet the memory endures. History, as always, is multifaceted. The triumph of one often means tragedy for another. Ivan returned to Moscow basking in glory. News of his wife giving birth to a son further amplified his joy. Although the infant did not live long, the Tsar was welcomed as a hero. To honor his victory, Ivan commanded the construction of one of Russia's most renowned buildings, St. Basil's Cathedral on Moscow's Red Square. With its vibrant, distinctive domes, the cathedral embodied a synthesis of Russian architecture and Eastern elements, serving as a physical emblem of the new multicultural empire that Russia had become. Nevertheless, Ivan's story did not end favorably. In the years following the capture of Kazan, Ivan grew increasingly cruel and psychologically unstable. He established the Oprichnina, a secret police force that terrorized the entire country. Thousands perished by his hand in fits of paranoid rage. And in a moment of fury in 1581, he personally struck down his eldest son with a staff. This is precisely why we refer to him as the Terrible, not only for his might, but also for his brutality. But that subject is for another narrative. For now, we must concentrate on the lessons learned. So, after all we've discussed, what lessons can be drawn? I believe there are three. For centuries, military dominance belonged to those possessing the swiftest cavalry and the finest archers. The Mongols forged the greatest empire in history by leveraging these advantages. But as technology evolved, with the advent of cannons, firearms, and advanced siege warfare, the entire dynamic shifted. What once seemed invincible suddenly became vulnerable. This principle extends beyond warfare. It applies to business, technology, and life itself. What succeeded yesterday might not succeed tomorrow. The capacity for adaptation, learning, and implementing novel ideas determined survival. Ivan wasn't the greatest military leader, but he was willing to learn from mistakes, adopt new technologies, and alter his tactics. This is why he triumphed where others failed. Legends recount valorous warriors and glorious battles. However, in reality, most conflicts are decided by mundane factors such as logistics, supply lines, and preparation. Ivan prevailed at Kazan not solely because he commanded a superior army. He won because he constructed Sviazk, an advanced base that resolved the issue of provisions. He won because he spent months preparing, training soldiers, marshaling weapons, and meticulously planning every detail. The same holds true in life. Success typically arises not from grand moments, but from meticulous preparation, diligent effort, and sustained perseverance over time. For Moscow, the fall of Kazan marked a beginning, the initial stride toward becoming a great power. For the Tatars, it was an endpoint, the loss of independence, and the commencement of centuries under foreign subjugation. History is not a simple tale of good versus evil. It is intricate. Every major event has winners and losers, those who celebrate and those who mourn. It's crucial to bear this in mind when we study history. We should not merely glorify the victors. We must also remember those who lost, the cultures that vanished, the voices that were silenced. Because true history isn't about kingdoms and empires. It's about people who lived, loved, hoped, and struggled through pivotal moments. On October 2nd, 1552, on a hill overlooking the Volga, a city fell, and with it, the last vestige of the Mongol Empire in Europe came to an end. But from its ashes rose an entirely new Russia, a multinational empire that would stretch from Poland to the Pacific, from the Arctic to Central Asia. The history of Kazan reminds us that history is forged in momentous times, when leaders face difficult decisions, when technology reshapes the rules, and when old empires yield to new ones. It further underscores how momentous these times are, often at a considerable cost. Every triumph carries an associated sorrow, and every fresh start presages an ending. Now, what element of this historical account resonated most deeply with you? Was it Ivan's ingenious engineering, the unwavering bravery of Kazan's defenders, or the far-reaching repercussions that shape the contemporary world we inhabit? Feel free to share your reflections in the comments beneath. Should you have found this presentation engaging, please consider hitting the like button, subscribing, and activating the notification bell to ensure you're alerted to forthcoming in-depth historical narratives. History, after all, is more than merely a record of events. It offers insight into our origins and, potentially, our future trajectory. We appreciate you watching, and keep in mind, every magnificent empire originates from a specific decision, a crucial choice, a flash of courage, or a moment of utter desperation where everything undergoes a profound transformation. Until our next video,